So I just finished the Resident Evil 3 remake on stream last night after waiting a really long time to play it. I don't really know why I waited so long to play it really, but I managed to stay away from pretty much any kind of spoiler for all that time. And honestly, that's both impressive and also not really that impressive at the same time. Considering after the game came out no one was really talking about it on my feed all that much, or maybe I was just tuned out of almost all kinds of RE discussion at that point, I don't know. The only thing I actually heard was that the game was really short, which made it weird that it was a full price game, and that Nemesis was used in a pretty boring way. Apart from that, I didn't hear anything else about the game until I played it on stream. But before we get into how I feel about the RE3 remake, I just want to give some context to those that have no idea about me, I guess. So I didn't get into Resident Evil until the Resident Evil 2 remake came out in early 2019, and that game blew me away. So much so that I started to go back and play the other entries into the series. And it's fair to say that the RE2 remake was enough to make me a full-fledged fan of the entire franchise. The things that really managed to draw me in with the RE2 remake were things like the exploration, the atmosphere, and the dual narrative that let us play through the entire game as two completely different characters. Leon and Claire are some of the best characters that the RE series has, and in the remake, their younger incarnations were fleshed out in a really cool way. So the RE2 remake not only won me over with characters that I found compelling, but it also convinced me that I like games where exploration is the main focus. I kinda got bored with games that are like RE in the past, where you would just run around and eventually figure out where to go. But the RE2 remake gave me a kind of epiphany or some shit, and now I love games like that. I particularly love RE2 remake so much that I learned how to speedrun the game, that I play every now and then on my Twitch, links down below. But anyway, I love RE2 remake, it's amazing. If I had to give that game a score right now, it would be a 9 out of 10 easy. But what about the RE3 remake? How did I feel about Jill Valentine's escapades with Nemesis in the zombie outbreak of Raccoon City? Well, it was alright. I know that isn't really saying that much, or maybe it is, but I kind of just thought that the game was fine. I liked it, don't get me wrong, but there's just something about this game that really rubs me the wrong way. And I think that the best way I can explain my feelings for this game is by going through all of my favorite things that the RE series does, and how this game just doesn't really do them all that well. First up, let's talk about exploration, and I think that most of you would agree that this is a pretty big part of an RE game. Alright, maybe not with the later games, but you know, RE1 to, I guess, 4, have all a pretty big emphasis on exploring your environment, finding keys, herbs, ammo, whatever, you know, just stuff. But the exploration in Resident Evil is only as good as the area that it's set in. Take RE1's mansion for example. This place was huge and had a huge amount of stuff to discover, and the entire place had this weird atmosphere and it's great. RE2 has the RPD, which is a police station that used to be an art museum, and as such has a lot of weirdness in its design, with long narrow hallways and multiple levels to explore. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that if the area I'm exploring is fairly basic in concept, I'm just not really gonna want to explore it that much. Cue RE3, which mainly takes place on the streets of Raccoon City. An amazing concept, right? To be on the streets with dozens of zombies roaming around is a fucking great idea. The problem is that A, there is barely any exploration to be had for the most part. Jill's first real part of gameplay lets her explore 2 streets of Raccoon City. 2! The original game let you cover so much ground and eventually even get you to the RPD, to then explore that! But RE3 Remake decides to just kind of strip away a lot of the exploration in favor of a more streamlined progression path. Alright, yeah, that's fine, but B, because almost all of the exploration has been gutted out, I just don't really care about the location as much anymore. I want immersive and well-designed places to explore, and Jill's side of the story just doesn't give me that at all. Now, Jill isn't the only character you play as in this game, because you also get to play as Carlos, and Carlos's sections in RE3 Remake are by far the best that the game has to offer. In 2 sections of the game, the control swaps from Jill and goes over to Carlos for a bit, and god, these sections are amazing. Carlos gets to explore the RPD before Leon or Claire ever get there in RE2, and there are so many nods to the RE2 remake here, it is incredible. It sets up so much stuff and even has lickers from RE2 that aren't seen anywhere else in this game. So as a fan of the RPD, this section got me good. But then Carlos also gets a spooky hospital to go and explore, and this is also great. The atmosphere is fantastic and I loved every second in it. They even brought back hunters. Like what? So yeah, out of the 2 characters, I enjoyed Carlos's sections way more. Jill's sections ironically feel more like the RE5 and RE6s of the series, where it was just kind of an action game with little suspense or dread. And Carlos, the guy who is stacked with an M4 and fucking tons of ammo, feels more like classic RE. I just don't understand. But to sum it up, exploration on Jill's side, not good. Exploration on Carlos's side, 8 hunters out of 10 lickers. Next up, let's talk about combat. Now, combat in the RE games is kind of a hard thing to exactly pin down. In the original games, combat was a choice you had to make as a player. Is it worth engaging these zombies now and wasting ammo, or would it be better to try and run around them and try to save that ammo? Then in later games, it was more of a haha gun go burr situation, and then RE2 kind of brought it back to the whole idea of, should I save my ammo or should I blow this zombie's head off instead? Which made for a lot of interesting situations in that game. Now, RE3 Remake kinda sits in the middle here of the conserve ammo mentality and the kill every zombie you see mentality. What I'm trying to say is that this game gives you way too much ammo for conserving it to be a necessity, but it doesn't give you quite enough to kill every zombie you see. So, which is it, game? I can either kill them all, or none of them. That's the mentality I'm going with here. Okay, this point kind of got a little derailed. But what I'm ultimately trying to say is that this game doesn't really feel like a survival horror game, and it doesn't really feel like an action game, which kind of muddies the personality of it just a little bit and doesn't really leave me with any sort of fondness for its mechanics or design. Oh, but they did add a dodge button. Okay, the dodge mechanic is actually very cool, I'll be honest. If they had this in RE2 Remake, my god, that would be heaven. Though if we did have a dodge button, that would kind of made Mr. X a pushover in that game. Oh yeah, speaking of Mr. X, Nemesis, the big bad mutant asshole of Resident Evil 3. We all know about Nemesis, and in the original game he was terrifying. He would appear often in the game to fuck your shit up whenever he felt like it, meaning you were constantly on your toes and wary about what was going to come around the next corner. Now, here's something I don't personally understand. In RE2 Remake, they took the concept of this hulking monster searching for you and applied it to Mr. X, which made that game very interesting in comparison to the original game's usage of Mr. X. Now, when RE3 Remake comes out and we're all expecting Nemesis to be an even more terrifying and badass version of Mr. X, there was a lot of disappointment. See, in the original RE3, they used a combination of random events and scripted battles where you would have to face off with him. But in the remake, every time that Nemesis shows up, it's just a scripted event and makes him a really boring thing to fight, especially when in the early stages of the game, you can just run right past him and not even fight the thing at all. Which, granted, you could do that in the original game too, but the difference there was that you never actually knew when he'd show up, and sometimes he'd be right in the way of where you needed to go. It made every playthrough of the original game fun, but now in the remake, every time he appears, it's in the exact same way he did before, and to me that's extremely boring. Now, with the size of the game and the way that the areas are laid out, it actually makes sense why they designed him in this way, since there aren't really many places where he could surprise you, apart from a couple of corridors, I guess, but that really comes down to how the game is structured, and that's a problem in itself. And this is where we get to talk about the pacing. Now, game length is a bit of a sketchy topic. Personally, I would rather a memorable 5 to 6 hour game over a fairly mundane 20+ hour experience. And obviously, there's some leeway in that statement too. The RE2 Remake was around a 4 to 5 hour game in the Leon A route, but there's also the Claire A route, Leon's B route, and Claire's B route. So there's like a decent 15 to 20-ish hours there of playtime. In the RE3 Remake, there is one route that combines both Jill and Carlos's story into one game. and this takes around 4 hours. If that was a really good 4 hours, I wouldn't give a shit, because either way, I'm going to be replaying this game on hardcore difficulty and for the unlockables, so it's not really an issue for me. The problem is that this game isn't a really fun 4 hours, because the pacing of the game is terrible. Jill barely spends any time in the streets of Raccoon City, she spends barely any time in the sewers, and the same can be said for Carlos and his sections. And that's really disappointing to me, because I want to be able to feel immersed in these areas, but I don't, because as soon as I'm kind of acclimated to it, the game just kind of pushes on to the next thing. Look, I know I've been kind of pointing out a lot of the negatives of this game, but really when it comes down to it, this is still a good game, especially if you're a Resident Evil fan. And it's miles better than some of the other titles that we've had in this series. I'm gonna give RE3 Remake a 7.5 out of 10. It falls short of becoming a great RE game, and unfortunately cuts a lot of what the original game did so well. With the butchering of Nemesis as well as the very short runtime, it all just melds into a game that really doesn't feel all that remarkable, especially in comparison to RE2 Remake. I said this in my stream and I'm gonna say it again here. RE3 Remake works so much better as a companion to the RE2 Remake. If you look at RE3 as just being another route of RE2, it makes a lot more sense and as a whole just feels better. But as a full price standalone game, this remake really missed the mark, and if you haven't played this for yourself, make sure to grab this game on sale.